One day, people woke up and realized that not 24 hours had passed, but 11 days. The calendar had jumped forward. Yesterday was September 2nd, and today was September 14th. What happened to those days? Where did they go? This is not a science fiction plot, but a reform that shook Europe, sparked protests and fears, and gave rise to myths. People thought they had been robbed. Or maybe someone really did erase time. This is the story of how humanity first attempted to control the most elusive thing of all, the passage of time, and what it led to. Imagine, you go to bed on September 2nd. You wake up, and it's already the 14th. 11 days have disappeared. They are gone. No yesterday, no tomorrow, only emptiness. It's as if you fell asleep in your own life and woke up in someone else's. This is what happened in 1752 in the British Empire. According to a parliamentary decree, September 2nd was immediately followed by September 14th. 11 days were erased from the lives of millions of people. Newspapers printed new schedules. Church services were rescheduled, and confusion reigned in families. In villages, people began to whisper, "Time has been stolen. We have been deceived." Thousands of people took to the streets. A wave of protests swept across England. Slogans appeared. "Give us back our 11 days." People demanded compensation. After all, they felt that a part of their lives had been taken away from them. Some were worried about losing wages for the days that had been cut. Others that their children no longer knew what day they were born. Even among educated people, rumors spread that the government had done this to delay debt payments or confuse the church calendar in order to change the dates of holidays. In Scotland, a legend spread that this calendar theft was me to repeat, part of a ritual. Hidden behind the new government. After all, whoever controls time controls everything. But the real reason was different. It originated in the depths of the ancient world, in the Roman Senate, and had been building up for centuries. 11 days is not a mistake or a conspiracy. It is a trying to undo debt to history. The price for a miscalculation made many centuries ago. And to understand why this happened, we need to go back to the very beginning. Back to where time became mathematics, where for the first time it was not gods but humans who tried to control it. Thus begins the story of the Panem Calendar War, in which religion, science, politics, and the human psyche itself clashed. A war in which it was not cities that were lost, but days. Real, lived, crossed-off days. And the score is still open. Few people know, but the time we live by is not a natural rhythm, but a human invention. And like any invention, it is prone to error. The main mistake is the Julian calendar, introduced by Julius Caesar in 44 BC. It was a mistake that humanity was aware of, but did not correct for almost 1,500 years. Before Caesar, the Roman calendar was chaotic. The months had different lengths, and priests added or removed days for political reasons. Sometimes the year could last 355 days, sometimes 377. This caused confusion in agriculture, religious holidays, and even military logistics. Then Caesar decided it was time to organize 320 time. He turned to an Alexandrian astronomer named Sosigenes. He proposed a simple scheme. The year should last 365 days, with a leap day added every 4 years. Thus, Caesar created the Julian calendar, and it really was ingenious for its time. Simple, understandable, convenient. But there was one problem. The astronomical year, that is, the time it takes for the Earth to complete one full revolution around the Sun, lasts not 365, but approximately 365.2, 422 days. The Julian calendar was wrong. By 1 day every 128 years. This seemed like a minor detail, but over the centuries, the error accumulated. The spring equinox, the starting point for Christian Easter, gradually shifted. By the 16th century, the difference was already 10 days. The Church noticed that Easter was no longer falling on the date prescribed by ancient canons. But why did it take so long for anyone to make corrections? Because the calendar is not just a count of days. It is a sacred structure woven together with religious dogma, social rituals, and power. Changing the calendar means changing the foundation of social order. In addition, Europe in the Middle Ages was fragmented. No single power could impose a unified reform on all countries. Even when the Pope raised the issue of correction, the kings were skeptical. Who could guarantee that the new calendar would not cause chaos, undermine the authority of the Church, or become a pretext for heresy? And yet, time passed. The error of the Julian calendar continued to grow. When Gregory III came to power, the Church realized that it could not wait any longer. It was not enough to simply add a day or two. It was necessary to erase the accumulated days from the calendar. Like tearing rotten pages from a book. And so began the most massive time correction in human history. In the year 1582, Pope Gregory III signed a document that changed the very flow of time. It was not a religious bull, nor a political charter, but a calendar reform, an attempt to correct what had been ignored for centuries. Its official name was Inter Gravissimus, but it went down in history as the beginning of the Gregorian calendar. The essence of the problem was very specific. Due to an error in the Julian calendar, the spring equinox had shifted from March 21 to March 11th. For the Catholic Church, where the date of Easter was tied to the astronomical cycle, this meant a patterns to discrepancy with canonical prescriptions. The world was no longer living according to divine time, and the Pope decided it was time to put everything back in its place. The solution seemed radical. According to the new decree, after October 4th, 1582, the 15th would immediately follow. 10 days were crossed out. They disappeared from the calendars of Catholic countries as if they had never existed. The equinox returned to its place. Easter once again corresponded to the calculations of the first councils. But this was only the first part of the reform. The second concerned the rules for leap years. To avoid the accumulation of errors in the future, the new calendar stipulated that every fourth year would be a leap year, except for those divisible by 100 but not by 400. That is, 1600, 1700, and 1800 were not leap years, but 2000 was. This system allowed for the most accurate synchronization of calendar and astronomical time. However, not everyone welcomed the reform with enthusiasm. In France and Italy, countries loyal to the Pope, the new dates were introduced quickly. But Protestant states perceived the innovation as papist manipulation. Germany, Holland, and Switzerland each adopted the reform at different times. Eastern Orthodox countries refused it altogether. The Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth introduced it, but with reservations, and Russia rejected it. For ordinary people, it came as a shock. Imagine, your wedding is scheduled for October 6th, and suddenly it doesn't exist. Or a person has died, and the date of their death has disappeared from the chronicles. They are buried on a day that doesn't exist. People perceive this not as an astronomical clarification, but as interference in their destiny. And where there is interference in fate, there is fear, mistrust, and panic. For a peasant, the calendar is not a calculation of orbits, but a schedule of life. When to sow, when to celebrate, when to fast. And now, someone from above is crossing out an entire decade. No explanation, just an order. It was a britihi. Revolution in time. Neat, bureaucratic, ecclesiastical. But its consequences turned out to be much deeper than the Vatican had anticipated. After all, the Pope could change the calendar, but he could not change people's trust in time. It would seem that 10 or 11 days had been crossed out. What was so terrible about that? The Church corrected astronomy, and astronomers rejoiced. But for ordinary people, it was a tsarki catastrophe. In an era when time was not an abstraction but a sacred order, any interference with the calendar was perceived as an intrusion into personal and collective destiny. This was particularly acute in England, which resisted the reform for a long time. The Catholic innovation was viewed with suspicion here as papal witchcraft. The British continued to live according to the Julian calendar for more than 170 years after its abolition in Catholic countries. Only in 1752, after lengthy discussions and parliamentary debates, was it decided to switch to the Gregorian calendar. According to the BT Calendar Act, after September 6, 1752, the 14th immediately followed. 11 days disappeared. Holidays were moved. Accounts and contracts were rewritten. But no one explained to the peasants, workers, and poor people what exactly had happened and why. For them, time was not a calculation for Easter, but the days of their lives. And those days had been stolen. Civil unrest broke out in London and other cities. Signs appeared in the streets. "Give us back our 11 days." It was not just protest. It was existential fear. People sincerely believed that a piece of their lives had been taken away from them. Some feared that this would affect their life expectancy. After all, the calendar already counts down time, and now it has become shorter. Others worried that their wages would be cut, since there were now fewer days in the month. In some villages, priests were accused of conspiracy. Rumors spread instantly. Allegedly, these days did not disappear just like that. They were taken away in exchange for something. There were even versions that the government and the church had performed some kind of ritual, burning the extra days to subjugate time to their power. Fear of invisible interference gave rise to conspiracy myths. That something forbidden was happening on the days that had been crossed out. Sacrifices, rewriting of history, or even experiments with time. The elderly were particularly hard hit. They felt that their lives had literally been cut short. Some wrote these days in their personal calendars, marking them as lost. There were cases of depression, panic, and even suicides attributed to the reform. When a person is torn away from the time they believed in, the foundation of their existence is destroyed. Many simply continued to live according to the old calendar, despite official bans. Villages continued to celebrate old dates, name days, and weddings, according to the Julian calendar. A dual calendar emerged, one on paper, the other in people's hearts. This was not just a conflict between astronomical and human time, it was a breakdown of trust between the authorities and the people. The paradox is that the aim of the reform was harmony, but it led to division. The state wanted precision, but got rebellion. The church wanted harmony, but caused chaos. And all because of 11 days. Ordinary, unremarkable days. But suddenly, they became a symbol of power, fear, and invisible loss. Thus began an era when time no longer belonged to the people. It became the property of those who could erase it. What does it mean to erase a day? Not just to stop marking it, but to make it as if it never existed. No one was born, no prayers were said, there was no sleep, no dawn, no lunch. In the book of time, there was a gaping void. When 11 days disappeared from the calendar, it was not only the economy or the church schedule that suffered, human perception of reality suffered. For the first time in history, people were confronted with the fact that time is not objective, that it can be rewritten, canceled, erased. This discovery was not liberating, but destructive. It undermined the very belief in the flow of life. Since ancient times, people have considered time sacred. It flowed cyclically, day, night, spring, autumn. Time belonged to the gods, the stars, nature. Even clocks were mechanical imitations of the heavenly rhythm. But the Gregorian reform showed that time is controlled by people. And that means it can be changed, canceled, and controlled. For many, this sounded like a challenge to the very order of the world. Legends began to appear about lost souls, stuck in days that had disappeared. There were village tales that if you were alone on the deleted dates, you could fall through into them. That forgotten children who died without a funeral, crimes that went unpunished, disappeared into this gap. Some even claimed that on these days, you could commit any evil deed, and it would not be recorded because the day did not exist. Philosophers of the time seriously debated whether a person's age could be considered complete if there were days missing from their life. Should this period be taken into account when paying pensions or concluding marriages? And if a person was born on September 3rd, on which day should they be congratulated if that day no longer existed? Even lawyers could not give a clear answer. Reality was crumbling. After all, the law is also based on time. Some thinkers went further. They argued that the 11 lost days were a symbol of a civilizational turning point. Until then, people had lived in harmony with nature, according to the stars and the sun. Now they lived according to a formula, according to the decisions of the authorities, according to orders. This was the beginning of the Great Mechanical Age, an age where the human and divine gave way to the instrumental and systemic. Religious mystics picked up on the theme. The disappearance of days was perceived as a sign of the end of time. After all, if time can disappear, then reality itself can disappear. Some sects began their calculations of the apocalypse with these 11 days. considering them part of the 7 times of darkness. In their view, it was an act of violence against the cosmos, for which humanity would still pay. But even without mysticism, on an everyday level, this loss left its mark. A fear remained in the memory of generations. Time can disappear. People who had never thought about the calendar suddenly realized that someone up there was capable of controlling their lives by simply crossing out a line in a book. And that changed their attitude toward time forever. 11 days. It doesn't sound scary, but if you think about it, that's 11 breaths, 11 prayers, 11 goodbyes, and meetings that never happened. 11 pages of life erased from paper. And if that's possible, what else is possible? The world would never be the same again. The calendar reform, which began in Catholic countries in Europe, was not immediately accepted by the whole world. On the contrary, it became a source of many years of disputes, refusals, and parallel times. For several centuries, the planet was literally split into 2 worlds. One lived according to the new Gregorian calendar, the other according to the old Julian calendar. This was not a religious schism, but a temporal one. One of the largest powers to reject the reform was Russia. Here, the calendar was not regarded as a technical tool, but as a sacred order established by the Church. In the Orthodox tradition, the Julian calendar was seen as canonical, and the Pope's intervention was considered heresy. The Russian Church categorically rejected the Gregorian calendar as an attempt at Latin witchcraft. Even Peter the Great, known for his reforms and westernization, did not dare to switch to the new calendar. He merely moved the beginning of the year from September 1 to January 1st. But the structure itself remained Julian. Russia continued to live according to the old style until the Revolution of 1917. Only the Soviet government in 1918, for political rather than religious reasons, adopted the Gregorian calendar. At the same time, 13 days were deleted at once. January 31st became February 14th. The result was a culturally and temporally divided world. Letters, contracts, and chronicles in some countries were dated one way, in others another. Even historical events needed clarification. According to the old style, or according to the new style. For example, the Great October Revolution, which took place on October 25th, according to the Julian calendar, actually happened on November 7th, according to the Gregorian calendar. This gave rise to chronological chaos, a situation in which the date itself becomes controversial. Other Eastern countries were also in no hurry to reform. Greece switched to the Gregorian calendar only in 1923. Serbia did so in 1901. Bulgaria followed in 1916. The Muslim world generally used the lunar calendar and did not need the Pope's corrections. China and Japan had their own time systems based on solar-lunar cycles and dynastic eras. As a result, in the same year, different civilizations lived on different dates. History seemed to move at different speeds in different parts of the world. This not only created confusion, but also revealed deep differences in the understanding of time itself. For Europe, it was an Bapifich, abstract scale, while for the East, it was a Poibithi, living tradition, linked to ritual, faith, and nature. The Gregorian reform did not simply change the calendar. It posed a question to the world. Whose time is it now? And who decides when tomorrow begins? When 11 days disappear, it is not just a disappearance from the calendar. It is a disappearance from consciousness. a loss that cannot be touched, but which leaves a mark on culture, memory, and the perception of the world. Centuries have passed since then. We live by the Gregorian calendar, counting days and planning years without thinking about what lies behind this system: violence against time. We have become accustomed to the idea that time can be organized, straightened out, and counted, that it has a beginning, an end, intervals, working days, and weekends. But all this is a construction, once imposed on humanity and experienced as trauma. What did we really lose when those days disappeared? We lost the monarch's innocence of time. Before, it seemed natural as the sunrise. Afterwards, it became a ford, technical system, over which someone has power. It's as if someone announced one day that the week would now last 9 days instead of 7, or that the year would be 400 days long instead of 365. The world would not collapse, but we would no longer perceive it as natural. We lost our sense of independence from the power over time. If 11 days can be cancelled, then tomorrow a month can be cancelled, or an extra one can be added, or history can be restarted. And this is what gave rise to a new form of anxiety. What if the history we know is also the result of someone's correction? But perhaps the most important loss is the certainty that time is something stable, universal, and fair. The reform has shown that this is not the case. Time can be different, parallel, and non-coincidental. Some peoples live in one day, others in another. The same moment can be called by different names. Time is no longer one. It is planet few, and perhaps subordinate. The paradox is that the calendar reform was necessary. It corrected a real mistake. It restored astronomical accuracy. But at the same time, it opened Pandora's box, releasing doubts, myths, and fears. We stopped believing in the eternal flow of time. We realized that it can be erased. And this knowledge is more frightening than any 11 days.